To give you a timeline on what happened, when we, on Friday, December 23rd, nearly a month after the certification of the election, which was on December 8th, we received a concerned call from two organizations. One is the California Ranked Choice Voting Coalition, and the other is Fair Vote. Both organizations are ranked choice voting advocacy groups. And they had been looking at our cast vote record for the November 8th election. That is the details behind every one of the votes that we tallied for the election. And they were concerned that the Alameda County election had been set for the November 8th election using a different approach for the ranked choice voting tally. It's a valid approach in other states. In Alameda County, a different approach has been codified that we are to be using for our ranked choice voting, and the system that we have from Dominion supports both approaches, and we'll go into some of those details. But they made us aware that they were seeing a potential setting issue for the election as they were analyzing our cast vote record. They let us know on Friday, December 23rd. My office researched the issue and researched it as well with our vendor, Dominion, and confirmed that there was a setting improperly set for our election in the way that it tallies the ranked choice voting tally. So we had confirmed that by Tuesday, the 27th, and on Wednesday, the 28th, we issued a press release notifying the public that we had a setting issue and that we had contacted all the parties involved that were affected by the setting issue. We have confirmed that there's only one race that changes with the setting change, and that is the Oakland Unified School District, District 4. The school director candidates have been notified. The Secretary of State has been notified as well. We've had discussions with the Secretary of State as well concerning the issue. So that is what happened. At least that's the timeline. And we've been moving forward with the help of County Council to navigate through how we bring in the correct totals specifically for the Oakland Unified School District, District 4, so that the proper candidate can be certified as the winning candidate. So to explain what happened, on this slide, we have a ballot. This is what the ballot would look like for that school district, District 4. And these are the three candidates that had run for office: Mike Hutchinson, Pecolia Maningo, and Nick Resnick. And this is an image of a ballot that comes into concern with the two different approaches of running ranked choice voting. It's when the voter does not cast a vote in their first choice. So on the left side of this ballot, you see the three candidates and the write-in choice, and then you see columns for each of the five choices that a voter can make. So first choice, second, third, fourth, fifth for the columns. The ballots that become a concern are the ballots where the voter did not cast a vote in the first choice, but cast a vote in the second, third, and fourth in this case. The two different approaches for handling ranked choice, the proper way for the way we run ranked choice in Alameda County would be to elevate all of the votes so that the voter has a first choice. In other words, we would have taken on this ballot, the second choice, which is for Mike Hutchinson, would have been elevated to be the first choice, and so on. The other way, which in another state in the nation is the way that they've chosen to implement this ballot, it would be suspended. It would assume that the voter made the choice to not vote in the first choice, and you would then go to this ballot would start to be counted once we got to the second round of ranked choice voting. So that is the two different approaches. It is a setting within the system to support the different implementations of ranked choice across the nation. In our case, we had the setting set incorrectly for our county. It should have elevated the vote. The machines read the tally correctly. The logic for the ranked choice was not set correct, so those votes were not elevated. When we take a look at the Oakland Unified School District District 4 race, there were 235 ballots that there was no first choice made. And this is the breakdown in the table of how many ballots were suspended on the first round. So Mike Hutchinson had 115 suspended votes. Picolia Maningo had 37. Nick Resnick had 61, and we had 22 overvotes. So those were the votes that should have been elevated as part of the first round tally. When we compare the two, in Table A is how we tallied the vote using the suspended ballot approach. You can see that Mike Hutchinson in round one has the least amount of votes at 8,112, and his votes get redistributed in the second round, and as a result, Nick Resnick is the winning candidate, and that's again using the approach that is used in other states, but not the one that we're supposed to be using in Alameda County. In Table B is the correct setting for the ranked choice algorithm, where the 235 suspended ballots are properly tallied in the first round, and Mike Hutchinson receives the larger number of second place votes. So it's Picolia Maningo who's the least vote getter, and her votes get redistributed, and her second place voters voted more predominantly for Mike Hutchinson, and as a result, Mike Hutchinson is the winning candidate with the proper setting. So that is what is at issue in this particular race. It comes into play because the first and second place candidates are so close in their vote totals, and the difference between the setting affects this particular race. We have looked at all the other ranked choice voting races, and having the proper setting does not change the outcome. I do know that what's been talked about significantly is the Oakland mayor race, so I did think that it was important to include the evaluation of what happened in this race when the setting is correct. So in green, again, is how it was set, the incorrect setting where we have suspended ballots. And in the first round, Tyrone Jordan is the least vote getter with 863 votes. And then we have the outcome of Sheng Tao being the winner with the vote spread that you see on the screen. in blue is with the correct setting, and Tyrone Jordan, with the suspended ballots assigned to him, the ones that were voted yet suspended, he picks up an additional 13 votes. Once we go into the round 2 of the vote distribution with Tyrone's votes being redistributed, all of the suspended ballots come back into play, and all the candidates receive all of the same votes that they have in round 2 in the incorrect version. And as a result, once we get down to around 9, you can see in the Oakland mayor's race that vote for vote, the outcome is exactly the same, with the suspended ballots versus the correct approach of having not suspended ballots but elevating the vote. As I said, we've done the evaluation for each and every one of the ranked choice voting elections for the November 8th election, and the outcome of the races do not change. The same candidates that win, except for with the exception of the Oakland School Director District 4 race. That concludes the presentation and what happened. We are working with County Council at the moment to figure out how exactly to bring the correct winning candidate in for the Oakland School Director District 4, and that is a work in progress at the moment.
And I think all of this is directed at the ranked choice voting. How can we be assured of the integrity of the election results? I mean, we've gotten PowerPoint here, but how can we reassure the public of the integrity of the election results? Because I know I've had a number of folks approach me, and they are very concerned, and I don't think what I've seen here today gives me any further confidence in the integrity of the election results relative to ranked choice voting.
That would be a question for the ROV.
Correct. So there are definitely some approaches that we need to take coming out of this election, working with the Secretary of State, working with our vendor, as well as working with the ranked choice advocacy community to put further approaches in. First of all, to look at putting stronger code in the election code in terms of the way that California implements ranked choice voting. Today, the code, California code, is very light, and if we had another city come on board asking for ranked choice voting, they could ask for ranked choice to be using the algorithm a different way. We don't have a California standard for ranked choice voting. And with all of the different approaches, I believe that we need some stronger guidance in the code around that. So there's some things that we can do there. I believe that we also need to work with the Secretary of State and our vendor to take a look at more thorough approaches to in our testing procedures to vet this particular type of a use case. We use our logic and accuracy testing to validate that the equipment is tallying correctly. That logic and accuracy testing did not pick up on this particular setting. So we do need to work on some additional testing procedures that will catch this particular setting issue.
So, go ahead. I thought you were done, Tim. Go ahead.
I think that's where I'll finish. Yes.
So you're saying that because at the moment the election code does not allow for counties to go to ranked choice voting. That is not permissible. But cities can follow that. Can set up a ranked choice voting program. Is that true? And if that's the case, you're saying there needs to be statewide standards established?
So counties for the county elections could choose to use ranked choice. Any jurisdiction could use ranked choice, but it's a decision that's being made at the local level to implement. And there's no state specific guidelines that say if you choose to use ranked choice voting in California, you need to implement it this way. So each local jurisdiction can choose a different way to implement ranked choice within the different approaches that ranked choice has for implementation.
Why were the late results so much different from the earlier results in several of the races?
In terms of so what we have seen over time is that our early voters have a tendency to vote a little differently than our late or just on time voters. So the voters that wait to the very last minute to vote at times vote very differently than the ones that vote right at the beginning of the early voting process.
Okay. And why were there so many overvotes in this election?
So, do you have a specific race that you're talking about?
The Oakland mayor's race.
Okay, I believe that what's at question in the Oakland mayor's race is the exhausted ballots. Is that maybe what you're talking about, or we're talking about overvotes?
Well, the thing is, that's another thing that makes it confusing. There's so many different terms. As a county supervisor and as a voter, I can't even keep track of all the different terms that are applied in ranked choice voting. So maybe you could better explain the terms, and then if the overvoting terminology isn't the correct terminology, then maybe you could provide the information.
Right. And what I've been hearing is concern on the exhausted ballots, less concern on overvotes, but more on the exhausted ballots. When we have 5 choices but 10 candidates in the race, if a voter votes for 5 candidates that don't end up being the top 2 candidates, each time their candidate becomes the lowest vote getter, it moves on to their next choice. Eventually, we run out of their votes. Eventually, they are not voting. They did not vote for who ends up being the top 2 candidates. So the term is that their ballot eventually becomes exhausted once we've rotated through all of the choices that they've made. And in the case of the Oakland mayor race with 10 candidates, that number of exhausted ballots turns into a larger number because of the possibilities of voters not choosing the 2 candidates that ended up being the top 2 candidates. And there's been a lot of concern about that term, exhausted ballot. There's some concern that, well, then that vote didn't get counted, but that vote did get counted. It was counted the number of times the voter voted in that race. They just didn't end up voting for the 2 candidates that ended up being the final 2 candidates.
So in this most recent election, there were voters in ranked choice jurisdictions, of which I live in Oakland. We got to vote make 5 choices. I never knew we could go 5. The last time it was 3. Who made the decision to go to 5? How was that decision made? What was the voter education? I didn't know anything about this. And were there other changes that could have been provided with more transparency to educate the voters around the election? Because I do feel very strongly that a lot of seniors and others find ranked choice voting to be very challenging.
So when we brought in our new system that had the capability of increasing the number of choices in ranked choice, I'm going to address a couple issues. We met with the counties, the cities that have ranked choice voting. At that time, it was San Leandro, Oakland, and Berkeley. Meeting with their city clerks, who are the election officials for those cities, we showed them the layout of the ballot with all of the different choices that they could make in terms of choices made available to the voters. And unanimously, the three cities chose to go with 5 votes, to move from 3 choices to 5 choices. That was a decision that the cities made because they are the election officials. When we meet with the cities around ranked choice, when we're implementing a ranked choice election, we ask them if there's any additional voter outreach that they would like Alameda County to perform. The cities themselves can perform education as well because they are the election officials for those cities. We do offer through our mandated services, which is voter education as part of it. We have a complete voter education program that we've implemented to educate our voters throughout the county. We do have a team that educates around ranked choice voting. We go out to over 200 events per year for voter education, but we do offer to the cities to do additional voter outreach and education. And the cities have said that they don't need any additional education from our office. And it's not that we don't offer it; we do offer it, and it's not that we don't do it. We do ranked choice voting and voter education as a part of our office's function. It's a question of whether additional voter education and outreach is necessary in any of the communities, and those cities have not asked us for any additional education.
So we didn't provide any additional money, for instance, to the city of Oakland for voter education in this November 8th, 2022 election?
Not beyond what we normally do. When we first implemented ranked choice voting back in 2010, the city did pay our office to put together a program, a much more extensive program, and the early rollout of ranked choice voting. But since then, they have not asked us to do that.
And then the fact that you went from 3 to 5, that decision was made in a conversation with the 3 jurisdictions. Was there any transparency or public light shed on that? I mean, because I'm just pointing to that particular nuance.
That was a decision that was made with the city clerks. There wasn't a press release. There wasn't anything that was brought before a city council to say that decision was made.
So the fact that that decision was made, and I'm just focusing on that one decision, nobody knew about it except for you and the city clerks.
And whomever they talk to within their organizations.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just focused on that particular piece. There could have been other nuances, both new as well as that had also been normalized, that there was no additional voter education around other than what you've typically done.
That's right.
Okay. So this gets to the question then of why does it take so long to get the final results? As opposed to typically we could, some of us have been around for a number of elections and we've seen results come in and we have a pretty good idea of the results after, that evening or definitely the next day. Here it was a much longer time period.
Yeah. So under the traditional voting, especially when I first started as a voter, you went to the polls to vote on election day, mm-hmm. and the vast majority of people voted in person at a polling location that you were assigned to. And during those days, if you wanted to vote by mail, at that time it was called absentee voting, you had to go through a process to get a ballot for that election and vote absentee. Over time, we've moved to vote by mail voting, which it changed from being called absentee voting to vote by mail voting. And we were allowed to offer permanent vote by mail voting status. And as our voters became more and more comfortable with vote by mail, we saw the numbers shift from people voting in person on election day to people voting by mail predominantly. And once the pandemic hit and we became a permanent vote by mail state, We have shifted from all of those votes that we would normally tally in the old traditional polling place model on election night, the vast majority of people voting on election day, and we had the tally by that night with a very small number of absentee ballots. We now, if we take a look at the election for November 8, 2022, we had about 30,000 people vote in person, and we had nearly 500,000 people vote by mail. Now, if those 500,000 people have voted by mail, about half of those showed up in my office on election night. Voters dropped those vote by mail ballots off in our drop boxes, and those vote by mail ballots, nearly half of the votes had to go through a signature verification process, a vetting process, in order to finally get to where we tallied them. That takes time. It's not something that we can do in an evening. It's something that can take a week or two, depending upon the volume of votes that we receive. So that's why in the original style, or an older style of polling location where you voted in person predominantly, could be reported, the vast majority of votes could be reported on election night, as compared to where we are today, when most of the votes are coming in an envelope that's signed, that has to be validated, and they're coming to us, at least half of them, on election night.
All right. And I think the main elections that are concerned are ranked choice voting elections. Why does a recount cost so much in terms of doing a manual recount in a ranked choice voting election? Why is that so expensive as opposed to a regular winner take all?
Right. So a recount is labor intensive just to begin with, especially on a large race. But let's just start with what a recount table looks like. We have one person who is calling out the vote, and we have two people who are doing a tally, a physical tally on a tally sheet. They're marking two sheets, and we have a two-person check. In other words, the two people tallying have to match perfectly as they're going through the count. So in order to get through, let's just say the Oakland mayor race, which is 130,000 votes, if it was just a traditional vote, we would have a large number of teams trying to get through this, and we had calculated we would need at least 15 tables of 3 to go through it, and it could take weeks. Now, to add to that complication is then you need to simulate the ranked choice voting algorithm. If you're not just counting a single vote, I voting for candidate 1 as my mayor choice. I'm now actually going and doing my mayor choice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's as if our teams are now having to hand count 5 elections, and then they're having to manually go through the process of saying, okay, now that we've counted the mayor's race once, let's take the least vote getter. We have to manually redistribute those votes, and then we have to count a second time. And in the mayor's race, it took 9 rounds, so that's nine hand counts. Mm-hmm. So it's not like and I'm not even going to call it simple. A hand count is complicated to begin with in a traditional election. Add the complexity of ranked choice voting, and it's essentially counting it in the mayor's race almost 9 times.
All right, thank you. And those are all my questions at the moment. I'll yield the floor, but I know I do have some comments I'd like to make, and also some recommendations once we hear from the speakers and get back to where the board wants to go with this. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the registrar's presentation, and some of the questions I may be asking has more to do with my understanding of the historical perspective. In your discussion with Supervisor Miley, you talked about the state providing guidelines on cities providing support for ranked choice voting. But my understanding is that the cities of Albany, Oakland, San Leandro, and Berkeley had gone through a voter initiative process to instill ranked choice voting, and they all have specific and different methodologies. If you had the state come in, how would that dovetail with a voter-approved initiative in those particular cities?
With and this is something that we'll have to talk with the Secretary of State about, but it's about putting some sort of structure around ranked choice voting in the state of California. We know that County of Riverside, for example, just this election cycle became the third county to implement ranked choice voting. If we have 58 counties in California, and I don't know how many cities. In my discussions with the Secretary of State, there is some discussion this year potentially of putting together some sort of a committee at the state level to say, how do we create some level of guidelines or bumpers for cities or jurisdictions that are interested in implementing ranked choice voting to stay within guidelines, so that we can keep the election integrity throughout the state of California shored up, rather than having a whole number of different approaches throughout the state for implementing ranked choice. So it's a question of, all right, is everybody agreeing that in California we're going to elevate the votes rather than to suspend the first vote? And there's a number of other decisions that we'll probably need to make. Should 5 choices be the choice? Or should it be 10? Those types of decisions, now that we know that the equipment can support some different settings, do we have default settings that are standard for California?
Okay. Thank you.